Hey everybody, we're back. So we are moving on to the astronomer's wife, and I've moved on to a different part of my basement, to the plumbing section. And you can see there's a nice new piece of pipe here. About 6 weeks ago, I came home and the top of my beautiful Samsung washing machine was covered in some unmentionable things because the old pipe here had gotten corroded inside and the whole system backed up. And of course, who did I think of? That's right, I thought of the astronomer's wife. So, nice new piece of plumbing. We'll feature that. It was very expensive to have the person come, so we want to make sure we get our money out of this. And by the way, today's class is brought to you by Tide Sport, to keep those sporting clothes of yours clean. And OxyClean, for when the stains just need to get out. Okay, so the astronomer's wife. The beginning of the story is kind of like, what? And then you get into the plot, and it's fairly easy to follow. But the interesting, the point, the theme, the real soul of the story is right here at the beginning. There's an evil moment on awakening when all things seem to pause. All right, so this is that time of day when you wake up, but you haven't started, you haven't gotten out of bed yet, or there's a pause. And what happens in that pause? Well, your mind might start to wander and think and muse on life. Not always a bad thing, right? But for women, they only falter and may set in action by a single move, a lifted hand, and the pendulum will swing. Next paragraph. The day would proceed from this, beat by beat, without reflection. So the idea here by our female author, Kay Boyle, is that a woman's life, well, sometimes women are best not reflecting on their life because it's a diminished life compared to a man's life. Again, this story was written similar time period to Chrysanthemums. This came out in 1936. And yeah, she's almost saying here it's better off not to reflect. And the astronomer's wife doesn't do that. But the hunky plumber comes in and makes her reflect a little bit. So, there's an evil moment. She is married to the astronomer. The title of the story is very interesting. She's defined by her marriage to him. She is the astronomer's wife. He was a man of other things, a dreamer. So where is he in this story? He's asleep, dreaming. Even when he's awake, he's sort of a dreamer, and he always has his mind on the stars, right? He's always looking at the stars. His head is in the clouds. He could be a college professor. He could be a philosopher. These are not bad things. However, he is not a man of action, of stuff, of certainty. Another place she says that the astronomers, her conversations with him were a continuous query. They never got to any point. It was all just thinking. And sometimes in life you need to get to the point. So the beginning there is very important. It's what gives the story really, I think, in some ways a feminist quality, that a woman should just go about her life without reflection. It's a lot safer. However, I don't think the author is saying that a woman should go without reflection. It's just that it's almost like a survival mechanism. Okay, so then the toilet backs up. The plumber comes. Mrs. Ames. The plumber himself looked up and saw Mrs. Ames with her voice hushed. Do you have a feeling her husband never looks up or down to see her? The mystery of silence of her husband's mind lay in the chiding finger on her lips. Her eyes were gray, for the light had been extinguished in them. She doesn't get a lot of attention, value from her husband. He's up all night. He's an astronomer in this time period. Now astronomers mostly look at computers during the day, but he's up at night looking at the stars. The plumber was a tough, hardy man, but he took off his hat when he spoke to her and looked her fully, almost insolently, in the eye. Now this is very good. He's a hardy guy, but he's polite, right? He's a gentleman. He's a blue-collar gentleman. That's a really good way to say it. He's a worker, but he is polite. Does it come from the wash basin or from the other? He's too polite to even say water closet or toilet. Does it come from the wash basin or the other? He's trying to be very, very sensitive to her. Skipping down, and he's looking her over. The plumber looked for a moment at her red kid slippers. Kid is a very nice leather made from baby goats. A little creepy, but she was standing just at the edge of the clean, pure-seeming tide. It's not pure. The tide isn't. It's no doubt the soil lines, he said severely. It may be something that stopped them. But my opinion is that the water seals aren't working. That's the trouble often enough in such cases. If you had a valve, you wouldn't be caught like this. Firm, certain statements. Mrs. Ames didn't know how to meet this rebuke. She stood watching a little, looking into the plumber's blue, relentless eye. He's looking right at her. He's looking right at her. And she's not used to this. She's not used to having attention paid to her, to have someone address her in such actionable ways. She's used to the astronomer just, the stars, and oh yes, the plumbers, the lines must be plugged. Pretty good stuff. When you need a plumber, let me tell you. Oh do, said the astronomer's wife. Here was a man who spoke of action and object as simply as women did. Gotta love the gender, the musing, the thoughts that Kay Boyle has on gender. He was a man who spoke of action and object as simply as women did. So the practicality of women here is being championed. And she likes this. Catherine, said the astronomer from upstairs in the clouds, I guess. There's a problem worthy of your mettle. So he's like, you handle it, you handle it. Moving ahead, the astronomer scorns her, but the words the astronomer had spoken still sounded in despair, yes. And she saw too, and she really likes this plumber, and she saw too that his hair was as light as gold. Perhaps, Mrs. Ames, he said rather bitterly, perhaps Mr. Ames, he said rather bitterly, would like to come down with me and have a look around. Of course, he's too much of a gentleman to invite her to go down. He's kind of bitter. He's like, well, I guess I have to ask for the man to come. So I don't think the plumber is being rude here by asking for Mr. Ames or being chauvinistic. It's just what he's supposed to do. Down, said Mrs. Ames in wonder. Into the drain, said the plumber brutally. They're a study for a man who likes to know what's what. The astronomer doesn't want to know what's what. Oh, Mr. Ames. He's still in bed, you see. Oh, yeah, we won't worry about him. The plumber lifted his strong, weathered face and looked curiously at her. Surely it seemed to him strange for a man to linger in bed when the sun pouring yellow as wine all over the place. The astronomer's wife saw his lean cheeks, his high rugged bones, and the deep seams in his brow. His flesh was as firm and clean as wood, stained richly tan with the climate's rigor. I think they're in Italy. His fingers were blunt but comprehensible to her, gripped in the ring and holding the iron door wide. The backs of his hands were bound round and round with ripe blue veins of blood. Ooh, baby. That's pretty hot stuff, the way she's looking at him, thinking about him. It's very nice to read a woman writer somewhat objectifying a man. We certainly see enough male writers objectifying women, even maybe a little bit in the chrysanthemums. So this is fun to read. She saw so then the plumber speaks in practical matters, and this is really to me the key contrast in the story. Whereas her husband had always gone up as the dead go, she knew now that there were others who went down. She's going to be a little naughty. Like the corporeal being of the dead. So of the body, the corporeal being goes back into the earth. That's where the body goes. Maybe the mind goes up. That men were then divided into two bodies now seemed clear to Mrs. Ames. This knowledge stunned her with its simplicity and took the uneasy motion from her limbs. She could not stir, but sat facing the mountain's rocky flanks and harking in silence to lucidity. Her husband was the mind, the other man the meat of all mankind. So there is something very sort of nice about seeing done to men here, what men usually do to women, talking about them somewhat objectively. I don't think this is offense. I'm certainly not offended by it anyway. It's actually a great way to think about men. One guy's the meat, the other's the mind. I mean, that's pretty much the two guys we have here. Now, I do think it's important. Chris, remember this. Will, you remember it also. Yeah. I think that's all the guys in class. It's good to be of the mind. That's why you're in school here, studying literature, improving your mind. But it's also important to be of the body. You never want to give up the savage animal side of us in favor of the intellect. There needs to be a balance. There needs to be a balance. You need to know how to understand a piece of literature. You need to know how to change a tire, right? You need to know how to maybe cut wood. You need to know how to understand a poem about cutting wood. Both must be nurtured and cultivated, the mind and the body. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Clearly this story is all in favor of the plumber, the meat, and not in favor of the mind. The mind was, I think, overvalued in this time period that we're talking about here. Maybe now, I don't know. But you need to have both. You need to have both. So that's a fun one. So we're going to cut this here because we're getting close to the time cap for a YouTube segment, and then we'll pick up and wrap this baby up.